And our last lightning talk speaker of the day is Dr. Chris Phillip, who comes from us through IU, as she's our PregMed fellow in Dr. Haas's lab and has been working on our copper database.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Quinney, for that introduction. So today I'll be presenting our work on identifying early gestation biospecimens for early onset pre-E prediction. So early onset pre-E is rare, but it carries significant maternal and fetal risk. And from a research standpoint, it's particularly difficult to study because biomarker discovery typically requires samples collected very early on in pregnancy, roughly around 16 weeks. And individual cohorts typically don't have enough cases at that stage. So the core issue is that individual biobanks are simply underpowered for this question. Currently, biospecimens are scattered across multiple independent biobanks, and there's no efficient way to identify what exists across institutions. So many repositories are not part of the national registry, so even if a sample does exist, it is in effect invisible. So this leads to an inefficient study design and missed opportunities for collaboration. This is where COPPER comes in. COPPER is this centralized directory of maternal and pediatric biobanks. And I have to emphasize that it does not store samples, it's just a registry. It allows researchers to identify where samples exist, and this enables cross-biobank collaboration without requiring physical transfer upfront. Our lead PI, Dr. Haas, likes to say it's kind of like the Amazon of maternal and fetal biobanks, but for discovery, not delivery. So our objective was straightforward. We wanted to test whether COPPER could identify enough early gestation biospecimens for meaningful early onset pre-E research. We defined early onset pre-E as having pre-eclampsia and delivery at or before 32 weeks. And we were specifically looking for samples that were collected before 16 weeks, and only plasma and serum, roughly around 100 microliters. And we also excluded chronic hypertension just to maintain a cleaner phenotype. So at that time, we had 17 biobanks listed on COPPER. We have 23 now. And so we asked for aggregate data only, no patient-level data. We specifically requested the number of eligible samples only and basic cohort characteristics. We did not want the samples. We just wanted to know how many there were. So this is purely a feasibility assessment of identification, and it was not an analysis. Out of the 17 biobanks, 7 met the eligibility criteria, and out of them, 5 responded to us. So even at this stage, it demonstrated that engagement within biobanks or across biobanks was very feasible. And from those 5 biobanks, we identified up to about 112 cases of early onset pre-E. And I know this seems like it's a really small number, but just to put it in perspective, a recent large study in Spain last year recruited about 9,600 patients and only identified 42 cases of early onset pre-E before 34 weeks, which is less than 1% of the whole cohort. So what that means is if you rely on traditional recruitment alone, you'd need an enormous sample size just to obtain a relatively small number of cases. And in contrast, if you used the centralized directory approach, you'd be able to identify at least 112 cases right off the bat. One of the largest takeaways for us was that these samples were located not in national major registries. So without COPPER, these samples would have been very difficult to identify. So it's not just an availability issue, it was also a visibility issue. Some of the strengths obviously are that, we could efficiently identify without sample transfers, and there was a multi-biobank collaboration. And we also addressed a key bottleneck in rare disease research, but the limitations are obviously that we had limited number of biobanks and the sample size was still quite modest. So to conclude, early onset pre-E research is fundamentally limited by sample availability, and copper enables efficient identification of all of these samples. And aggregation across biobanks is not just feasible, it is necessary. So if any of your labs do have spare samples, please consider joining copper because this will speed up the collaboration process and more efficient research. Thank you.